Hey everybody, it's Chris, and we are going to continue the series where I've been looking at Sorcerer subclasses and ranking their various features. And we're doing the last subclass in the 2024 Player's Handbook today, Aberrant Sorcery. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the features and give them each a ranking, then talk about the class as a whole, then talk about multiclassing, and how the subclass compares to other subclasses at each of the levels. So we're going to begin at level 3 with telepathic speech. You can form a telepathic connection between your mind and the mind of another. As a bonus action, choose one creature you can see within 30 feet of yourself. You and the chosen creature can communicate telepathically with each other, while the two of you are within a number of miles of each other equal to your charisma modifier, minimum of 1 mile. To understand each other, you must mentally use a language the other knows. The telepathic connection lasts for a number of minutes equal to your sorcerer level. It ends early if you use this ability to form a connection with a different creature. So the game actually has several different ways of achieving telepathy or private communication, and this one, it's middle of the road. Some telepathy allows you to bypass the need to share a language. This isn't one of those. The 30-foot range to set this up isn't that far, and the duration of minutes equal to your sorcerer level isn't that long. It also limits you to telepathic communication with one creature at a time. On the plus side, this feature has no limit on uses, which is definitely nice. Telepathy is normally going to be a thing for utility, and when I see it used in play, it's moderately useful some of the time. For example, I've seen it used to deceive an NPC or a possible enemy, as the sorcerer is working off a high charisma, and deception is a class skill, so that the creature contacted thinks the telepathy is coming from some other source or a more powerful source. So there are some opportunities for creativity. This is not a big feature, but it's okay. Generally, it's a way you can have a private conversation with someone, whether it's to coordinate with an ally in negotiations, or maybe to initiate communication with an NPC. Our other level 3 feature is psionic spells. When you reach a sorcerer level specified in the psionic spells table, you thereafter always have the listed spells prepared. And we have, at level 3, Arms of Hadar, Calm Emotions, Detect Thoughts, and Dissonant Whispers, and then the cantrip Mind Sliver. At level 5, we get Hunger of Hadar and Sending. Level 7, Evert's Black Tentacles and Summon Aberration. And level 9, Rary's Telepathic Bond and Telekinesis. So we're going to start at level 3, and we'll start with the cantrip, which is Mind Sliver, which is a good cantrip. It's also on the Sorcerer cantrip list, and sorcerers get a good number of cantrips, so it's basically one extra cantrip that you can choose from the Sorcerer spell list. Arms of Hadar is the most disappointing spell at this level. It's normally only available to warlocks, and they can have it. In fact, I seldom take it with a warlock. Creates a 10-foot burst around you that does not avoid friendly fire. Creatures in the area make a strength saving throw or take 2d6 necrotic damage, which is low for an area of effect even at first level, and they lose reactions until the start of their next turn. The damage isn't good, the range isn't good, and friendly fire isn't good. Dissonant Whispers is a bit better. Normally, this is available only to bards, and the target makes a wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, they take 3d6 psychic damage, and then they use their reaction to move as far away from you as possible. One mistake I see made with this spell fairly often is casting it on a creature that's already used its reaction. So be attentive to make the most out of this. Don't cast it on a creature that's used its reaction already. Mainly, the play here is to provoke opportunity attacks with the movement. So it can do a lot more than the base 3d6. Don't do this thinking that it's going to do a lot of damage on its own. This is one of those spells you're not going to use very often once higher levels are achieved. It doesn't really have upcasting, or it does have upcasting, but the upcasting is poor. And even at level 3, it's not a huge play. Calm Emotions is a spell I don't see taken that often. It's also normally not available to sorcerers, and it's not taken very often in groups I play in. And I do think that's a bit of a missed opportunity at times. You can use it as an area of effect to remove the charmed and or frightened conditions from allies, or on potential enemies to avoid a fight. It is circumstantial, and it also uses your concentration. So if you remove Charmed and or Frightened, the conditions are not actually removed, they are suppressed until the spell ends. Nevertheless, I think this is a decent and somewhat underrated spell. Detect Thoughts is a pretty good spell. It's on the Sorcerer spell list, but if you don't get it automatically, like an Aberrant Sorcerer, it is a tough fit on Sorcerer preparations. This is utility, but this spell can be used to locate hidden or invisible creatures, or more commonly, to read the thoughts of a creature. If you use one magic action, you can detect its most surface thought, and with subsequent magic actions, it gets its first saving throw to avoid learning deeper thoughts and end the spell. If you do the second magic action to probe for deeper thoughts, whether they make the saving throw or not, the creature knows that you're probing its mind, meaning it doesn't know if you're just reading its surface thoughts. I find Detect Thoughts ends up coming up fairly often in gameplay, and it's a fairly good second level spell. Overall, if we're looking at the level 3 spells, I think they're okay. There's no spells here I think are top tier, but at least other than Arms of Hadar, I do think they're decent spells. Level 5, we're going to get Hunger of Hadar and Sending. So we're going to start with Sending, which allows the caster to communicate with another creature over any distance and even other planes of existence, though there is a small chance of failure if you do the latter. The spell consists of 125 or fewer word telepathic message, followed by a response with the same restriction. So the value here, of course, is pretty utility, but Sending is probably the most common method for long-range communication in the game. The value of Sending tends to be very campaign dependent. In some campaigns, it's almost essential. In other campaigns, it's basically useless. But like I said, in the right campaign, it can be of high value. And if I'm going to speak in generalities, I'd consider it overall an okay spell. Then we have the complicated spell, Hunger of Hadar. First off, I'll say I like it more for its level than Arms of Hadar. Creates a 20-foot radius sphere of darkness up to 150 feet away. The darkness lasts for up to 1 minute and uses your concentration. Within the area of darkness, it's difficult terrain, which cannot be illuminated, even by magic, even by the daylight spell. And creatures in the area take a bit of cold damage and acid damage at different points in their turn. One interesting thing about the spell is how this darkness works. Unlike the darkness spell, it does not have any restriction in the spell text regarding dark vision being able to see into the area, but it instead says a creature fully in the darkness has the blinded condition. That means a creature in the area can't see even if it has Devil's Sight or True Sight. And remember, it can't use any spell at all to illuminate the area. Blind Sight should still function, and a creature outside the area should be able to see through it with regular old dark vision. The upcasting is pretty interesting too. Since both the cold and the acid damage increase by a d6 per spell slot level, meaning effectively you're gaining 2d6 damage per round per spell slot level, which is more than most spells of this type. On the other hand, this is not one of those areas where creatures take damage right away when they move into the area, so a creature could, in theory, start its turn outside the area, move in on their turn, and then move out and take no damage at all. My experience is that Hunger of Hadar is not an easy spell to use effectively. I've seen it used multiple times by players who are very disappointed with the results, getting little effect from it as enemies simply move out of the area after taking a couple d6 cold damage. On the other hand, I've seen Hunger of Hadar used quite effectively, but this always involves more careful tactical use, usually by some other means to prevent movement out of the area, and it often requires the coordination of other players. This is not a spell normally available to sorcerers, being on the Warlock spell list, but it can be a decent addition to a more tactically oriented group. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Hunger of Hadar is a great spell. It can be a good spell, but has high complication, and it's not for everyone. So at level 3 and 5, I'd say Aberrant spells at best are okay, but the list is nothing to write home about. but that does change at level 7. Level 7, we're getting Evert's Black Tentacles and Summon Aberration. So if you find Hunger of Hadar a more difficult to use static damage effect, you're likely going to have more luck with Evert's Black Tentacles. The spell creates a 20-foot square on the ground within 90 feet that lasts up to a minute using your concentration, and the area is also difficult terrain. Creatures in the area make a strength saving throw, and if they fail, they take 3d6 bludgeoning damage and they're restrained. The creature makes the saving throw again at the end of each of its turns in the area, taking another 3d6 damage on a failed save. Now, the wording is a little bit clunky on this one. You have to read it carefully. But the way I read it, if a creature is already restrained, but they make their saving throw, then they don't take damage at the end of their turn, but they remain restrained. In order to not be restrained, the creature must use its action to make a strength athletics check against your spell save DC. Otherwise, they remain restrained until the spell ends. One nice thing about this spell is if a creature enters the area, it has to make the saving throw right away. So this spell combines nicely with force movement, like the push weapon mastery. Now, there is an interesting thing about the wording here, and I'm almost hesitant to bring it up because players I've interacted with often have very passionate opinions on whether this is how the spell is supposed to work or not. But the interaction carries forward from the previous rule set. So let's say you have a creature and they're in the area and they get restrained. And then they manage to leave the area despite being restrained. Maybe it teleports out or something. The spell text does not say or even imply that that ends the restrained condition. If we read the text literally, that creature would no longer make the saving throws, which otherwise could result in continued damage. So they're going to stop taking damage, but they would stay restrained until succeeding on that athletics check. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you need to run it that way. And like I've said, players I've interacted with will often have very strong opinions on whether this spell is supposed to work that way or not. So feel free to share your opinions in the comments. Regardless of how you interpret that aspect of the spell, Evert's Black Tentacles is a pretty good spell. And it's normally not available to sorcerers, just to wizards. Though I will point out the use of this spell is at least fairly similar to the second level web spell, which is on the sorcerer spell list. And there's a fairly good chance you picked up web at level 3. The main advantages of Evert's are the damage, which web doesn't do, and it doesn't burn up if it receives fire damage, which web does do. So whether it's worth keeping both spells at level 7 is questionable. Nevertheless, Evert's Black Tentacles is a good spell. Then we have Summon Aberration, and I've mentioned this in previous videos in this series, but personally, I am a fan of the summon spells. And sorcerers normally don't have access to any of the summon spells. And Summon Aberration is one of my favorites, maybe my favorite. We have 3 options for the Aberrant Spirit, and they are all significantly different from each other. The Mind Flayer option does damage to creatures around it at the start of each of its turn, in addition to its regular attacks, but be careful because this does have friendly fire. The Slod option regenerates, which can be very handy if you're hoping to use the spirit in multiple combats, because it can heal up to full in between combats with no cost to you, and it also improves the resilience of the spirit in even a single combat. And the Beholderkin option has a ranged attack that has a great range, and it flies with hover, so it's basically a long-range attack drone that can add a fair amount of damage to your routine. I have nothing bad to say about this spell. It's a good spell and maybe the most versatile of all the summon spells. It is a very good cast at its base level of 4, or it can be upcast with a 6th level slot. So the level 7 spells gained are really good for Aberrant sorcerers. Draconic is getting Arcane Eye and Charm Monster at this level. Clockwork is getting Freedom of Movement and Summon Construct. I think Aberrant is the winner at level 7. And both spells gained are not normally available to sorcerers. The only point I'll knock off is from Evert's essentially being an upgrade to the web spell, which is already available to sorcerers. Nevertheless, level 7, very nice for Aberrant sorcery. And then at level 9, we get Rary's Telepathic Bond and Telekinesis. So Rary's telepathic bond allows the sorcerer to set up telepathic communication with the entire party, or other friendly NPCs, or both. It has a 1 hour duration, and it's a ritual spell, so you can cast it without a spell slot. If I'm playing a wizard, I generally pick up this spell to round out my ritual casting options, but with a sorcerer, it is filling up a preparation slot. I mean, we're getting that preparation for free, but if this spell was something else, it would be prepared as well. Rary's has some obvious redundancy with our telepathic speech feature. It's more comprehensive, but the telepathic communication with party members was something at least our Aberrant Sorcerer could already do. Now, this spell is obviously thematically appropriate for Aberrant Sorcery, but if you can't tell, I'm not super excited about getting it with an Aberrant Sorcerer. Telekinesis is a good spell. It lasts up to 10 minutes using concentration, meaning we can potentially use it over multiple encounters. It provides a magic action on each of our turns that we can use to move objects of significant size, up to huge size, and potentially even wrestle objects out of the hands of unwilling creatures. Alternatively, you can use it to restrain a huge or smaller creature, which gets a strength saving throw to avoid the effect. You can also move a creature that you've restrained up to 30 feet in any direction, even upwards, meaning if it escapes later, it's going to fall, unless it can fly. Since telekinesis is using a magic action that isn't casting a spell, telekinesis combines nicely with Quicken Spell in order to cast bonus action non-concentration spells on our turn. Telekinesis is on the Sorcerer spell list, and it is a really nice pick for the Sorcerer, but for Aberrant, it's a free preparation. So, level 9 is okay, but not standout in any way like level 7 was. For Aberrant spells overall, the list is okay, with level 7 standing out as really good. I think a bit of the elephant in the room here is that Aberrant Mind sorcerers in Tasha's could switch out spells from this list for spells of the Divination or Enchantment schools from the Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard spell list. This allowed the Aberrant Mind sorcerer to switch in spells like Tasha's Hideous Laughter or Tasha's Mind Whip, or both. Both excellent candidates for twin spell metamagic in the 2024 rules. Because of the spell schools, this wasn't as potent as Clockwork Soul's ability to switch subclass spells, but was still a really nice benefit that they no longer have. Then we move on to level 6 in Psionic Sorcery. When you cast any level 1 plus spell from your Psionic Spells feature, you can cast it by expending a spell slot as normal, or by spending a number of sorcery points equal to the spell's level. If you cast a spell using sorcery points, it requires no verbal or somatic components, and it requires no material components unless they're consumed by the spell or have a cost specified in it. So any of the spells from our Psionic Spells feature can be cast using sorcery points equal to the level of the spell. And when we do this, we're essentially getting the equivalent of casting it with Subtle Spell Metamagic applied to the spell automatically, without preventing other metamagic from being applied. When you have a feature like this, you automatically cast the spells at their base level, according to the rules, unless a feature specifically says otherwise, which this one doesn't. So we can't upcast any of these spells if we're using Psionic Sorcery to cast them. However, as long as we're casting them at their base level, Psionic Sorcery is a good deal. A sorcerer can use Font of Magic to cast spells with sorcery points by using a bonus action to convert them. But if we look at this chart, we can see that the cost of doing that in sorcery points is always higher than the level of the spell by either 1 or 2 sorcery points, depending on the spell slot level. So an Aberrant Sorcerer can cast Telekinesis with 5 sorcery points, automatically gaining the benefits of Subtle Spell Metamagic, while any other sorcerer that wanted to do that would be forced to spend 7 sorcery points if they didn't have the spell slot, and use a bonus action, and if they want to be a subtle spell, another sorcery point on top of that, assuming they have Subtle Spell Metamagic. This means that an Aberrant Sorcerer, if they're willing to forego their use of sorcery points on Metamagic, can simply cast more leveled spells than other sorcerers can. The other thing I'll mention as a tip here is when you are picking your metamagic, keep in mind that since we are essentially getting Subtle Spell for free on all our Psionic Sorcery spells, we might want to consider not taking Subtle Spell as a metamagic option, or at least switching it out once we get to level 6, since there are a lot of spells that we're automatically going to get those benefits for anyways. Another thing to note about Font of Magic is it allows a sorcerer to convert spell slots into sorcery points. When you do that, you get a number of sorcery points equal to the spell slot level, and it doesn't use an action. So what this means is, once our Aberrant Sorcerer gets to level 6, unless we want to upcast any of the spells on our Aberrant Sorcery spell list, we can always cast them with Psionic Sorcery. There's just no point in using a 3rd level spell slot to cast Hunger of Vidar when you could just immediately convert the slot into 3 sorcery points and cast it with Psionic Sorcery instead, meaning all these spells would be cast with the benefit of being cast subtly for free as long as we cast them at their base level. Now, there are lots of situations where casting a spell with subtle meta magic or the benefits of subtle meta magic isn't going to make a difference, in which case I guess it doesn't really make a difference whether you use your spell slot to cast a spell or sorcery points. But just saying carte blanche to your DM that if I cast one of these sorcery spells that's on the Aberrant Sorcery list, it is always subtle, just makes sense. When it comes up, then it's there. Now, Psionic Sorcery isn't quite as good as it used to be because, of course, previously we could adjust the spell list it was applicable for. Nevertheless, it's still a really nice feature. Well in line with the other 6th-level features of other Sorcerer subclasses, and better than some. But with Aberrant Sorcery, we're not done at level 6, because we also are going to get Psychic Defenses. You have resistance to psychic damage, and you have advantage on saving throws to avoid or to end the charmed or frightened condition. Now, on its own, this would be the worst 6th-level subclass feature for Sorcerers. But this is in addition to Psionic Sorcery, and we're talking about a damage resistance and advantage on some saving throws. So it's far from worthless. And when you put them together, I would argue Aberrant Sorcery has the best 6th level of any of the Sorcerer subclasses. Psionic Sorcery on its own might rank top tier. I think that's maybe debatable. But together with Psychic Defenses, I have no problem at all ranking this at the top of level 6. That brings us to level 14 and Revelation in Flesh. You can unleash the aberrant truth hidden within yourself. As a bonus action, you can spend 1 sorcery point or more to magically alter your body for 10 minutes. For each sorcery point you spend, you gain one of the following benefits of your choice, the effects of which last until the alteration ends. The first is Aquatic Adaptation. You gain a swim speed equal to twice your speed, and you can breathe underwater. Gills grow from your neck or flare behind your ears, and your fingers become webbed or you grow wriggling cilia. Then we have Glistening Flight. You gain a fly speed equal to your speed, and you can hover. As you fly, your skin glistens with mucus or otherworldly light. And then See the Invisible. You can see any invisible creature within 60 feet of yourself that isn't behind total cover. Your eyes also turn black or become writhing sensory tendrils. And then Worm-like Movement. Your body, along with any equipment you're wearing or carrying, becomes slimy and pliable. You can move through any space as narrow as 1 inch, and you can spend 5 feet of movement to escape from non-magical restraints or the grappled condition. So the first thing I'm going to mention is that I don't think all of these options are necessarily equal, but there are certain circumstances where any of them might be your best option. The second thing I'll mention is that you get one of these traits for each sorcery point spent. So if you really wanted to, you could spend 4 sorcery points and benefit from all 4 at the same time. Though I do question how many situations you'll be in where you need both a swim and a fly speed. And I think the obvious subclass to compare this to is Draconic Sorcery that can get a fly speed at level 14, and the duration is an hour, and the speed is 60. Aberrant Sorcery Flight only lasts for 10 minutes, with a fly speed of only 30, and it has to use a sorcery point. It can't do it for free. On the other hand, Aberrant can use this feature again with 1 sorcery point, while Draconic has to spend 3 sorcery points to use theirs again. So if the feature is used twice and not needed for more than 10 minutes in each situation, then Aberrant Sorcery version is actually less costly. You also get Hover, meaning if you gain the prone condition, you don't fall. And more importantly, flight is only one of 4 options that the Aberrant Sorcerer has, while Draconic, it's the only option. The swim speed is obviously circumstantial, but it is double speed, which is pretty good. And there's actually not a lot of ways outside of magic items to gain a swim speed when you need it. Sea Invisibility is a 2nd level spell, and it's one of those spells that's circumstantial enough to fit on your prepared spell list. And Worm-like Movement can have a use for a utility, but also has a potential combat application, allowing the sorcerer to take cover in some situations where otherwise it would be impossible. So this is really good. Now, I've mentioned this in all 3 other sorcerer subclass videos, that every sorcerer has a good feature at level 14. And we've already looked at Draconic, which, as I pointed out, does have some advantages compared to this. And Wild Magic gets the ability to better control wild magic effects, which is super handy. And Clockwork has Trance of Order, which is a premier feature on that subclass. In fact, I think I'd be hard-pressed to say this feature is as dramatic as Trance of Order. But this is still really good, but I have to place it mid-tier though, as it's just not the best at this level, and it's far more comparable to the other sorcerer subclasses than Clockwork. Then at level 18, we're getting Warping Explosion. You can unleash a space warping anomaly. As a magic action, you teleport to an unoccupied space you can see within 120 feet of yourself. Immediately after you disappear, each creature within 30 feet of the space you left must make a strength saving throw against your spell save DC. On a failed save, the creature takes 3d10 force damage and is pulled straight towards the space you left, ending in an unoccupied space as close to your former space as possible. On a successful save, the creature takes half as much damage only. Once you use this feature, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest, unless you spend 5 sorcery points, no action required, to restore your use of it. So this is basically a teleport feature with some additions. It does require line of sight, like Misty Step does, which makes it probably worse than Dimension Door for teleporting. And it also doesn't bring along a passenger or have the range of a Dimension Door. And we are talking about level 18, where a 4th level Dimension Door isn't even a huge investment anymore. This, of course, has an additional effect that Dimension Door doesn't have. Each creature within 30 feet of the space we left makes a strength saving throw or takes damage, not a whole lot of damage, but damage, and is moved by force straight towards the space we left. So ideally, we left a space that the enemies don't want to be in. This can also be a way to group up enemies, so we could teleport, pull a bunch of enemies into a bunch, then we hit them with a quicken spell that covers an area that might not have otherwise gotten the whole group. One thing that makes this harder to use tactically is it doesn't care whether the creatures within 30 feet are friend or foe. So you could pull allies along with enemies and do damage to them as well. So this is not an easy feature to use tactically, though it certainly has tactical uses. Otherwise, it's an okay teleport. It has a fairly good range, but it does have a line of sight requirement, and at level 18, teleportation just isn't going to be all that unique. This is probably not as good as Clockwork Cavalcade for Clockwork Sorcerer, or even Wild Magic's Tame Surge. I'd say it's closer aligned with Dragon Companion, though honestly, I'd say it's even probably a bit worse than that. So I think I would rank this low tier. So overall, I think Aberrant Mind, like Clockwork, starts out really slowly. At level 6, there is a big jump, and then another pretty big jump at level 7 because of the spells we're gaining. So that's really the sweet spot for this subclass. At level 7, I would actually rank it as maybe the strongest sorcerer subclass. I don't think that lasts though, because Clockwork has stronger 5th level spells and better higher level subclass features. So how does that impact multiclassing? Well, if I'm just going to take a few levels in Sorcerer, I mean even up to 5 levels in Sorcerer, I would recommend looking at either Wild Magic or Draconic. If you're looking at high levels, I mean honestly Clockwork is probably the strongest. But Aberrant is extremely strong at level 6 and 7, and it still holds its own up to those high levels. So a 20 straight level Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, I think, is decently good. It's also a really good candidate for 19 levels with an armor dip, and then you would want to look at a dip in either Paladin, Cleric, Druid, or Ranger, and depending which one you choose, you're going to need to have a higher Wisdom score than you normally would, or a higher Strength score than you normally would if you want to do Paladin. But these combinations where most of our levels fall into Sorcerer do well with Aberrant Sorcery. For a Sorcerer, I think it's tough. I mean, you're going to need to be well into tier 3 before this kind of combination is going to pay off taking Aberrant Sorcery over other Sorcerer subclasses. Unless you're playing a one-shot where you're already high level, if you're playing level by level, I'd consider looking at either Wild Magic or Draconic. For a Sorlock, Aberrant can work better, as you're going to get into those prime levels more easily in a typical campaign. In fact, I would probably consider achieving either level 7 or 8 in Aberrant Sorcerer before taking those Warlock levels at all. If I was doing a Bard multiclass, I don't think I'd go Aberrant. This is the kind of multiclass that tends to be primarily Bard, and with Aberrant, to get the most from the subclass, we just need a bigger level investment. Same goes for a Rogue multiclass if your plan is to go primarily Rogue. Look at other subclasses instead. Wild Magic is a really strong pick. However, some Rogue levels on an Aberrant Sorcerer could work well, and like with the other Sorcerer subclasses, I'd be looking for 3 levels of Rogue with the Thief subclass. In fact, if you want to make a character that fits the magical roguish sneaky character, I'll just remind you that Aberrant, after 6 levels, would work really nicely, as psionic spells can be cast without verbal components. So if you want to be really sneaky and still cast spells, Aberrant Mind is a good way to go. It saves you taking subtle spell meta magic and spending those sorcery points. So as for ranking the Aberrant Sorcerer overall, it obviously depends on your level, just like the other Sorcerer subclasses, which is why in my next video, I'm going to go into depth ranking the Sorcerer subclasses against each other. And I'm going to look at the older content as well at that time. So I'm going to give you a more comprehensive ranking of Sorcerer subclasses at every tier of play, for every kind of major multiclass we see. And that will complete my analysis of the Sorcerer. And I'm going to move on to other classes from there. So I hope you'll join me. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.